I'm from a small town in Doddridge County, West Virginia called West Union, and not a whole lot happens here, besides petty theft and drugs and the predictable stuff. It's a very everybody knows everybody kind of area, and their business is everybody else's business. However, there was a boy named Joseph Spencer that I grew up with from daycare and up. We weren't too close. He was always introverted and reserved, but we were friendly and had mutual friends, so I spoke to him regularly. Occasionally, he'd make a little too dark joke or get a flash of unnecessary anger, but he was always quick to smile or laugh it off. He was never mean to anyone, didn't pick on anyone, and was incredibly smart. He was just a little odd, but overall nice. He just seemed like a shy kid. Then, on September 3rd, 2012, he murdered his parents and his little sister. No one saw it coming, and no one could believe it. He had been acting normal the days leading up to it. He has an older sister and an older brother who are only alive now because they weren't home. The brother was at a friend's house and the sister away at college. He shot his dad in the head while he was asleep, hit his mom in the back as she tried to run, and shot his 9-year-old sister. From what I understand, he called the police and waited for them out on the front steps. He claimed he did it because his dad was abusive, and his mom never prevented the abuse or defended him. But then, shooting his 9-year-old sister doesn't make much sense. His older sister is married to a friend of my husband and I. The sweetest woman I've ever met. His older brother is married to a friend of ours too. He was terrible on drugs for a while, blaming himself for what happened. They both have children of their own now and are doing pretty well. But I couldn't imagine the pain and the grief that happened to them and their family. Anyways, I've been waiting to send this in for a couple of years now, and I hope you do an episode on this story. In April 1997, I was 16 years old, a sophomore in high school, and had just gotten my first little used car. I worked 2 jobs to pay the payments and insurance. My parents' marriage of 20 years was going down the drain, leaving my brother and myself to our own devices. We lived in a small town, so unfortunately we drank and smoked weed to look fantastic and deal with our depression over our parents' divorce. Jamie and I were only 16 months apart, so we hung out in the same group of friends and we were always together. Unfortunately, I started seeing this guy 6 years older than me, so he was 22 at the time, and he was just bad news from the jump. He had yet to graduate from school or have a job or car, so he spent his days looking for girls to ride him around and play basketball. My dad had moved out of our house, so my mom had become lax with the rules, and she sometimes let B stay the night as long as he slept on our couch. One night during a school week, my mom said no to B staying over and told me to drive him home. He lived about 15 minutes away from my house, so even though I didn't want him to leave, I knew my mom meant business, so B and I left my house around 10 p.m. Now, to make you understand this a little bit better, I will describe the road we had to drive on the best way I can. We lived in a little town in West Virginia that was sandwiched between 2 slightly bigger cities, but there was only one road that connected all of these towns, Route 60, and it was just a narrow 2-lane road with lots of blind curves and hills. Nevertheless, it was the main thoroughfare for all the traffic, including tractor trailers that hauled food, coal, and wood. Driving it was no big deal if you had grown up there, but to outsiders they often remarked how the road nauseated them. Anyways, the night I was driving B home was a clear night, not much traffic, and I was going around 45 miles. The speed limit was 55. I rounded a slightly sharp curve and was blinded by another vehicle's bright lights, and suddenly there was a loud boom, and I remember seeing 2 legs fly up in front of me. I immediately pulled over the car to the side of the road, thinking I had hit a deer, and I kept asking, "B, what did we hit? What was that?" Finally, we both jumped out of the car and turned to look at the road to see what I had hit. A woman was lying in the middle of the road. She had a tiny little girl that was about 20 feet away as well. I could tell they were not moving. My brain and body just went on autopilot. I ran to the nearest house, where it just so happened one of my best friends lived, and I shouted to them to call 911 and told them I had hit 2 people in the road. I was crying and shaking uncontrollably. I called my mom and she said she was on her way. My friend and I ran back up to the road where B had managed to stop traffic from both directions. I remember walking over to the little girl. She had blonde hair and a beaded necklace that said, Hannah. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and I knew she had head trauma. While waiting for the paramedics, I took stock of the scene around me. In the lane opposite the direction I had been traveling sat a pickup truck with a camper top, and it was parked right smack dab in the middle of the road. One of the headlights was out, and the other was on high beam, hence why I couldn't see the vehicle very well. The driver's side door was opened, and the woman's car CD player was repeating blasting Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train over and over. I finally yelled for someone to please turn it off. I don't know who finally did it though. After what seemed like forever, emergency personnel arrived and the mother and daughter were airlifted to trauma hospitals. I'm going to stop right here for now before I tell you the rest of the story, as I've written quite a bit, and I'm not even sure if anyone is interested. But if you'd like to know what happened and why the people were in the road, please feel free to let me know and I will gladly share the rest of this traumatizing story. Here's the rest to those who are interested. The next day, we were updated that the mother had broken ribs, broken legs, and some internal damage, but the little girl Hannah had died from the head trauma. I was devastated. The case would be presented to the prosecuting attorney to see if I would be charged with possible manslaughter or vehicular homicide. I was just a teenager. They brought my car home to me. There were still strands of blonde hair in my right headlight. I had horrible nightmares where I would see legs flying up before me. I started gritting my teeth so hard that my upper jaw shifted. I was put into counseling with an excellent psychiatrist. Meanwhile, the state brought in a team of investigators that measured the markings on the road, i.e. where my car was, where the people had landed, etc. I waited in fear to see what my future would hold. Finally, all the evidence was submitted to the prosecuting attorney and the judge, and it was decided that it was a total freak accident that couldn't have been avoided. I wouldn't be criminally charged. It was a huge relief, but I felt so bad and responsible. I couldn't drive for at least 10 months. In the meantime, the woman's insurance company sued my insurance company, so we had to go to court to give depositions. It was terrible reliving that night, but we found out a lot. We discovered the woman, Jody, wasn't even supposed to have her daughter. She had previously lost custody of her and the father had her. Jody had taken Hannah from her father's house and had been riding around in that truck for 3 days. Jody had been in mental health hospitals for her whole life. The reason she gave for being in the middle of the road that night, there was a dead possum in the street and her daughter was an animal lover, so they stopped to move it out of the road. A precious little girl lost her life over roadkill. My insurance company didn't award Jody any money on her part for being negligent, but they did award $50,000 on the roll for Hannah. This tragedy has affected my entire life. I am now 41 years old and still can't drive at night. I just think that this story might be interesting to some people. It's strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for your time. This story takes place about 3 years after my family and I moved to Grafton, Virginia. I'm 16 years old and live with my 2 younger brothers, Ben and James, and my parents on a 100-acre densely wooded lot. I'm not trying to ramble on, so let me start telling my story. It was almost summer break, and my brothers and I had just gotten off the bus. The walk to the house would take about 20 to 25 minutes if we kept a good pace. We get off the bus around 2:45 and got home around 3:15 to 3:20 most days, so no one in my family worries when it takes us a little while to get home. While the 3 of us walked towards the house, I noticed the woods were silent. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had my brothers to talk to keep my mind at ease. but after a few more minutes of walking and it was still dead silent other than our conversation, I got a weird feeling. I told my two brothers to be quiet for a minute and listen. They stopped talking and I focused on scanning the wood line in all directions to see if I could spot any movement at all. Nothing. Not a single ounce of noise. Then the woods suddenly erupted with singing birds and everything went back to normal. Not wanting to make my brothers any more scared than they were, I just picked up the pace and they followed behind. We got home, put our school bags down, and looked through the pantry for snacks. My mother must have been home early, since we saw her car in the driveway. She came down the stairs and talked to us about the school and offered to cook us some pancakes. We agreed and helped her get out the ingredients she needed to make them. "We're out of eggs," I said to my mother. She told me to go out to the chicken coop and see if there were any she missed while out there this morning. I slipped on my shoes and made my way out the back door. The walk from the house to the chicken coop is not very short. It's about 10 minutes away from home and not in a clearing. The first 2 minutes of the walk were not bad. They were utterly uneventful, if I would say so myself. Nothing really out of place happened. It wasn't until I saw the coop that the woods were silent again. Like on the way home from the bus, I scanned the woods like before to see if anything was moving, and like last time, I didn't see anything. But something was definitely off about this. I got this deep sense of dread that almost made me vomit in fear, and the thought of something or someone staring at me would just not leave the back of my mind. Something or someone was watching me, and I could not see where or what it was. Being a dumb kid, I picked up a few rocks and proceeded to throw them into different spots of the woods to scare whatever it was away. This only made what was watching me mad. It let out a groan that sounded like a dying animal. Suddenly, rocks started getting thrown from inside the woods, and it was aimed directly toward me. I screamed and started running back toward the house. This thing was following me. Every time I would run a bit faster, it did the same. It was running completely parallel with me. It was just behind the wood line, and I couldn't see it. Once I got to the backyard, I ran to the steps and into my house. My mother looked at me in shock, and she told me I was pale as a ghost. Not caring about the eggs, she comforted me and told me to say what happened. I did, and she just laughed it off and told me it was my imagination getting the best of me. My two younger brothers laughed and said they would come with me to get the eggs so I wouldn't be scared. Not knowing how to tell them no and not wanting to be the chicken older brother, I agreed to have them come with me. I picked up a big stick while walking with them and then walked ahead. Once we made it to the chicken coop, I noticed that the door was open and that none of the chickens were there. After my brothers gathered some eggs, I went to look for the chickens. About 30 feet behind the coop, a horrible smell hit my nose and made me gag. All the chickens had been ripped apart and left to rot. Now, even more scared than before, I told my brothers that we needed to get to the house as quickly as we could so we didn't end up like those chickens. Again, they laughed at me and walked to the house like normal. But not wanting to leave them alone, I stuck with them. Halfway home, I heard something behind us crunch a stick. My heart sank because they were in front of me. I turned and saw nothing, but the woods were deathly quiet. That sense of dread hit me again, and I wanted to vomit, but I ended up holding it together and saying, "What the hell is that?" And we all ran, dropping the eggs once again. Our mission failed. I didn't see what he was looking at until a rock flew out of the woods and hit me in the forehead. Then I finally saw what this thing was. Then I finally got a glimpse as to what this thing was. It had to have been 7 or 8 feet tall, an almost translucent gray color with those bright white eyes. I can only describe them as the headlights of a car. This thing was giant and did not seem like it feared us at all. I grabbed my two brothers' hands and took off as fast as we could back to the house. This thing followed extremely closely behind until we reached the porch. We all turned around and saw it standing about 60 feet from the house. As weird as this may sound, it smiled at us. It almost looked sad that we had run away. The 3 of us got inside and locked the back door. At this point, my dad was home and we explained what we had seen. "Ah, the Grafton monster," he said and laughed, as my mom did earlier that day. The last week of school ended and we got off the bus for the final time that year. Not worrying about what we saw on that horrible day, we got to the house a bit earlier than usual. My mom wasn't home yet, so we got the key from under the mat and went inside. Turning around to put the key back under the rug, I saw those bright white eyes and that devilish, again almost sad-looking smile, and started crying in fear. I could tell this thing was not going to hurt us, at least I didn't think so, but the fear of not knowing what the hell this thing was bothering me, and still bothers me to this day. It's been 6 years since the first time the three of us saw it, and we still occasionally have rocks thrown at us while walking. It's become normal. Sometimes we even throw them back. Sometimes we even hear a weird groan-like laugh and keep on with our day. I don't know what this thing is or what its intentions are. Still, it hasn't seemingly caused any problems other than killing our chickens. Thanks for picking my story, and I just wanted to say thank you, Swamp Dweller. Your videos keep me and my family entertained on late weekend nights, and everyone enjoys listening to your scary true stories. I think it's time people understand the truth of this thing. I'm 23 years old, but I was 13 when this happened. I don't feel safe sharing the location, but I was hunting with my old man, so there were forests and even large rock formations in the area. Every time my dad and I went hunting, we'd make a point to set up camp and a fire near the stream upon arriving. The forest was an amazing place by day, but a place that grew far more mysterious and even scary by night. I always made a point to sleep prior to or at the same time as my old man, so I wasn't the only one awake at night. The hunts we'd go on were family tradition and annual. We'd always spend a week in the woods on every hunt. Now that I've set things up, you should understand the story behind the evil we encountered on this hunt. It was the first day of our hunt and we had found no deer. This was odd as there were usually deer everywhere, and we'd often have one bagged by the end of day one. Having no game killed, we went to bed around 10 that night. It was 3 in the morning when I awoke to the sound of rattling outside the tent. Looking outside the tent, I noticed the fire had gone out. It took me a bit, but eventually, I mustered the courage to investigate. I wish I hadn't investigated at all, though, if I'm honest. Remember those rock formations I mentioned earlier? They're about 30 or 40 feet tall, and about 10 feet in diameter. Gazing upon the highest rock, I saw it. It was some monstrosity that stood at least 6 feet tall and had blackish, brown skin. It had thin arms and legs, and I'm pretty sure its appendages were longer than most humans by a few inches. The thing that left me the most in fear, though, were those wings. It quickly turned in a flash, and what I saw haunts me to this day. The creature had a human face with no features outside of bright, glowing red eyes. The moment I saw this, I of course screamed my head off, at which point the thing flapped its huge wings and vanished into the night sky. My dad came out wondering what the hell had happened and why I was screaming. I told him everything that had happened, at which point he looked at me like I was crazy before telling me to go back to sleep. I, of course, didn't sleep at all that night. I kept seeing that monstrosity burned into my memory. The hunt always lasted a week, and I was terrified even after that. Every moment of every day, I would be scared that I would see that thing again, or that it would come back and try to get me or something. I never saw it again, but something else strange did happen. We never saw a deer that entire week. My old man chalked it up to bad luck, but I didn't believe that was why we never saw any deer. I believe this thing is why. The worst part came when we had to pack up. We had enough things that packing was a 2-round trip. It was when I was going back for the final set of stuff that I noticed the footsteps in the mud. They were huge and confirmed for me what I saw was real. The prints themselves looked like they belonged to a creature with 5 toes that were slightly larger than my dad's. They towered over anyone by 6 feet 8 inches. The strangest part was, the back of the prints were triangular and shaped and stretched out at least 3 inches back. We left soon after, and I thankfully have never seen anything like this since. For a while now, ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with Point Pleasant, West Virginia. My dad used to tell me stories of the Mothman and how it terrorized the small town back in the 60s. It's because of his stories I started doing research on other cryptids and urban legends, like skinwalkers, wendigos, the Jersey Devil, and many others. Point Pleasant was the closest town to me, so I made it a goal to drive down there for a weekend on the 53rd anniversary of the first Mothman sighting. On Friday, November 15th, I picked up my stepbrother and stepsister, and we headed down to West Virginia. They were both skeptics. They didn't care about the legend. I honestly don't know why they even wanted to go in the first place. We made it to the small town around 3 p.m. and checked into the Low Hotel. A couple of hours after going into the Mothman Museum and checking out the other small shops, my two friends, Katie and Joanna, made it down for the weekend trip as well. We all met at the Mothman restaurant where some locals knew we were from out of town and enjoyed us talking about the small town. One of them asked, "You folks go check out the TNT area yet?" I responded with, "Not yet, but it's on our to-do list." This is when our group thought it would be a great idea to go there at nighttime and head to the area where Mothman was sighted by the two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallet. We bought lights and headlamps and headed to the area at around 8:45 p.m. We approached a gate that was blocked off so no vehicles could pass by, and decided to get out of the car and walk into the wooded area. It was really dark out, and all we had to guide our way was our lights we brought and my GPS leading us to one of the bunkers. We made it to an opening in the forest where I believe the factory's building once stood before getting demolished. It was at this time my stepsister and Joanna saw a pair of eyes staring at us from the woods. Whatever it was turned around and walked back into the forest. They assumed it was a big animal, and for our safety, we headed back to the car. As we passed the gate, I noticed it could be lifted with two people, and we decided to open it and head in with my car. As soon as we passed the open area, we found a bunker to our right, parked the car, and went inside to get some pictures. Our one friend was beginning to get a little too uncomfortable, so for her sake, I told her we will come back when it's daylight, so we could be more aware of our surroundings in the wood. We got back in the car, and I pulled back into the road. Before we could take off, Katie and I told the group we were going to close the fence since it was closed for a reason. We got out of the car, which was facing away from the fence, and the only lights we had were my brake lights on. We picked up the fence and slowly started moving it back into place. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the bunker we were just at. They easily stood 6 to 7 feet off the ground, and it was just staring at us. I stopped moving and I said, "Katie, do you see that?" She responded with, "What?" and looked up and saw the eyes too. The moment we both were looking at the eyes, it became red and started coming toward us. I yelled, "Katie, run!" And as she screamed and ran for the car, the creature pursuing us let out this horrifying roar. Nothing I have ever heard in my life before or since. As Katie ran, she fell and hit the ground hard, and I didn't move till I knew she was safely inside. As soon as I got her in, I ran. The eyes were easily 15 feet away from me at this point, and I jumped in the car and pressed on the gas as hard as I could. The road to get out of the TNT area is a 35-mile-per-hour road, and I was easily doing 100 to get out of there. We were very shaken up about this event, but it honestly felt like history was repeating itself 53 years ago. Once we got back to the hotel, we gathered our thoughts and I tried to think logically on what we saw. We looked up wildlife local to the area and tried to compare the noise, but nothing matched. I'm not saying it was the Mothman, or Sheep Squatch, or Wendigo, but something about the way it stood and started coming towards us made me think otherwise. My group and I have decided to invest in tech to record our cryptid hunts next time we go. We want to return back to Point Pleasant soon to try and capture what we saw on camera. Cryptid hunting is no joke. What we felt was genuine fear, and we could have died that night. Yes, it might have been a bear, it might have been a mountain lion, but you got to be careful. You don't know what's out there, waiting in the dark for its next meal. This happened back in 2012, in Florida. I was 22 at the time and my ex was 19. We both had fallen on tough times and ended up becoming homeless. We had no choice but to pitch a tent in the woods and do our best to survive. We lived in that tent for about a year and a half. Unfortunately, during this time we both became addicted to meth. I know, not a great story, right? It's not the best background, but it happened and there's nothing we can do about it, and there is no sugarcoating addiction. We had been living in our tent for about 6 months at this point, and our little tent had become a pretty impressive home base that we entirely built by tweaking. We ended up with 3 tents with a screened-in area to keep the mosquitoes out. There was a park about a half a mile away from our camp, and every evening different churches would come to visit this park and feed the homeless. So one evening, my ex and I went to this park to get food. We had been awake for about 5 days at this point and were coming down, so we needed food and a lot of rest. We ended up meeting a couple at the park, and they were about our age, maybe a few years younger. They joined us at our table and told us their story and how they ended up homeless. They told us they had no tent and nowhere to go, so my ex elbowed me in the ribcage and gave me the eyes. So I asked them if they wanted to stay in our extra storage tent. They took us up on the offer, being incredibly grateful. After all, we were all homeless and we needed to take care of each other. Once we were all done eating, we packed up our leftovers and started to head back to the home base. Our little setup seemed to impress the couple when we reached the tents. I grabbed some dry wood with the boy and set up a small fire in the makeshift fire pit. We sat around the fire talking and laughing for a couple of hours, and we got to know each other better. Soon the fire turned to a smoldering ember, and we decided to go to bed. I gave them some extra pillows and blankets, and we all said goodnight. I was lying in my tent in and out of sleep. It was an hour after everybody said goodnight, and at this point, I was almost delirious from the amount of time I had been awake. Then I heard a loud smacking sound. It woke me up pretty quickly. I was a bit confused because I didn't hear any voices, so I thought it must have been my imagination at first. So I laid back down, and then I heard it again, but this time much louder, and this time followed by the sound of a zipper. I can hear the girl at the door of my tent pleading to come in, so I opened and invited her in. Of course I'm annoyed, but it is what it is. I gave her a pillow, then I hear the zipper in the tent once again. Now the boy is at the front of my tent, screaming at the girl to come out of my tent. She refused. So what does this guy do? He unzips my door, grabs her by the hair, and rips her out of my tent. I'm no saint, and I won't be someone to say that I have never manhandled or put my hands on my exes in any sort of situation, especially in the worst of my addiction. But that night I didn't have the patience to deal with these two, and I was not about to stand by and watch this girl get beat down by someone 3 times her size. I jumped to my feet and bum-rushed the guy. I had no advantage over him at all. In all actuality, I was the same size as the girl, but I was no stranger to fights myself. I grew up with 5 brothers. Being the only girl, they ensured I knew how to defend myself. I made contact with the boy. He didn't see me until it was far too late, luckily. He was instantly on his back, but he got up rather quickly, and I suffered one of the worst beatings of my life. I kept pushing him away, trying not to get hit, and I just kept myself between him and the girl. This kid was throwing haymakers at me over and over. Every time I hit the ground, I would get back up, and he moved from my face to my ribs. But still, I would not let him get to the girls. He struck me. I wouldn't get back up. I was just bloody and battered at this point, knowing I had some broken ribs. If things got any worse, I would probably die. And that's when I heard a screaming from the girl, who was trying to protect me from the continuous kicks to the ribs. This idiot pulls out brass knuckles that double into a pocket knife. The kid punched my ex in the chest, flipped open the blade, and tried to cut her. I saw the red come through her shirt, and I blacked out. The rest of the story is a recounting through my ex's words. I sprang to my feet and was super quiet. I looked at my ex, saw the wound, thank goodness it wasn't anything more than a surface wound, and I started walking around. I started to the side and found a log big enough to make an impact and small enough to basically be like a softball swing. I ran behind him, looked down, and stomped a stick to get his attention. I made him look at me as I softball swung at his head. He immediately crumpled to the ground. The girls were trying to make me stop at this point, but I jumped on top of him, grabbed the remaining log pieces, and repeatedly struck him in the head. I apologize if that is graphic. Once the log was nothing but splinters, I got off him, he was unconscious, and I grabbed the claw hammer from the front of my tent. I grabbed the hammer and started to scream in a demonic voice. It was almost unintelligible. I made my way to the guy, turned the hammer claw in. I raised the hammer, and as I was mid-swing, only inches from his temple, both of the girls grabbed my arm and disarmed me. They didn't let me kill him, and I thank them all the time for that. My rage just took over. I don't even know how to explain it. There was nothing they could do for my ribs. There was nothing they could do for my rib fractures, my skull fracture. Everything was only going to be healing in time, essentially. There was nothing the hospital was going to be able to do for it. So, instead of killing this guy, I just called the police. We waited for them to come pick him up. An EMT took me to the hospital, and I got bandaged up. We never saw that couple again, and for days after that I could barely walk as the pain was unbearable. Unfortunately, I can't really say that after this experience I was on my way to recovery. But I would get there eventually, of course. But it was the biggest eye-opening thing in my life. This happened a few months ago. My friend, who is 23 years old and a male, and I, who is 22 years old and a female, were hanging out one Sunday afternoon. Since it was a lovely sunny day and it was near the end of fall and the cold winter was fast approaching, we decided to go to a bar or a cafe. We would get some beers and relax at the park to soak up one of the last sunny days that we would get that year. We bought some beer and snacks at the store and decided to sit on a bench at the park nearest to the store because we didn't want to walk too terribly far. The area I live in is known for having many beautiful gardens, almost next to every block of buildings. The park was tiny to give you a general idea of our surroundings. A few benches were next to a child's playground, and a basketball court was a little bit down the road. Buildings surrounded the park for the most part. Most of the area was covered in grass, but the garden was built so underneath the swings and slides there were tiny white rocks. Little, but they were rocks nonetheless. We were the only people there for easily 10 or 20 minutes. None of the other benches were occupied, no other kids were on the playground, it was just peace and quiet. Suddenly, we noticed this man running extremely fast in our direction. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just running after his dog or something of the like. So we kept minding our business. Suddenly, he stopped abruptly as soon as he got to the playground. Now, I was a bit confused at this point, but very quickly my confusion turned into fear when I saw this man pick up a handful of rocks and throw them everywhere while making bizarre grunting noises and screaming. I looked over at my friend and told him that I wanted to leave immediately. This guy was twacked out of his mind. He said he wasn't sure if this was a good idea since the man had not noticed us yet. And if we just got up and left, he could see us and decide to attack us. We sat there for a few more minutes watching this man, hoping he would go and not notice us. But, to our luck, of course he noticed us. And as soon as he saw us, he ran exceptionally quickly, got very close to our faces, and started flailing his arms at us, still making these weird grunting noises. We just looked at each other, quickly grabbed our stuff and tried to get up. When the man noticed that he stood before me, blocking me from moving, he grunted in my face very loudly. His breath smelled like absolute crap. I was so scared, not knowing what to do. I am not much of a fighter, and neither is my friend. This man was indeed way more potent than us. I seriously considered just putting my cigarette out on his arm to distract him and free myself from the trap he had put me in. My friend got up and took a step toward him in an attempt to scare him off. Luckily, this worked and the man backed off a bit, just enough so I could get up and escape. As soon as I got up, we started running away as fast as we could, hoping we wouldn't be chased after. As we were running, I noticed rocks around us raining down because the man had started throwing them at us in handfuls. Luckily, none of us got hurt and we were able to get out of there unharmed. We had a few scratches and bruises, both of us were pretty shaken up after that, and we never knew exactly what his intentions were. However, we both concluded that it was pretty clear that he had some mental problems and was probably twacked out on some drugs. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I live in Michigan. I was 16 years old when these events happened. I am a substantial athletic nerd and go hiking on a daily basis, unless I'm feeling lazy that day. Unfortunately, I picked the wrong day to go hiking, and I met and experienced something I would not want to share or ever experience again. I wouldn't even put this on my worst enemy. I drove to my typical hiking trail. I go there just about every time I go hiking, and this day I saw a creepy guy who looked to be in his early to mid-30s. Me being stubborn and hard-headed, I just decided to ignore them and continue jogging on the trail anyway. Typically, if you see somebody acting weird in a parking lot, especially to a trail or somewhere outdoorsy, definitely have a friend with you or at least some sort of protection. You never know what their intentions are. I took a short glance at him and started going on to the path. I got 200 to 300 yards away from the entrance and took a short break until I heard a scream. It sounded like a man was absolutely losing his mind, and then I looked down the path and my heart dropped. I saw the same guy from before in the parking lot running straight towards me, screaming. My adrenaline rushed into me, and I began to run as fast as I possibly could. This guy ran so fast that he caught up with me in no time, and I was a speedy runner. The guy ran like he had taken 2 shots of steroids and was a straight bat out of hell. I started to cry in panic, freaking the heck out. I quickly turned into the woods and returned to the parking lot area. I kept hearing his footsteps not too far behind me. As I kept running, the footsteps started to get slower, and I eventually was losing him. Once I made it to the parking lot and had any sense of safety again, I jumped into my car, locked all the doors, and immediately called the cops on my cell phone. Not very long after, they arrived and searched the entire area. They did eventually find the man. He was a homeless man. He was 37 years old, and they found a very big, rusted butcher knife in one of his coat pockets. I'm glad I did ROTC throughout high school, or else I would not have had the energy to be able to outrun him. He was faster than me, but my stamina was overall better. This is a short, creepy story, but it forever lives on inside of me. I was a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. It wasn't a bad job. The scenery was amazing. I loved to drive up Klingman's Dome overlook and watch the sunrise. Anytime there was a thunderstorm, I headed for that overlook. One of the best things about the job is the autonomy. Being left alone to do whatever you want is kind of excellent, but it doesn't come without its downside. This park is massive, over 1 million acres, and 11 million people visit annually. I found out the hard way why the park closes at night though. If you've never driven through the Great Smokies on a cloudy, moonless night, you've never experienced true soul-crushing darkness. Do you know those extremely bright LED lights that so many trucks have on the front of their grille blind you when they drive towards you? Yeah, our trucks don't have those. We have regular lights, the old, dull, yellow glow. The ones that make you wonder if your battery is going dead or if you'd be better off shining a flashlight ahead of you because you would probably see more that way. The AM radio in the Ranger truck spews out static-filled country garbage. It would be easy just to turn it off, but sometimes I feel like it's my only company on the endless black ribbon of road that runs through this sea of darkness. One thing this job gives you plenty of is time to think, and sometimes that's not always a good thing. I slam on my brakes to avoid hitting a deer. It glances at me, then continues to strut across the road in no hurry. "You're welcome," I yell out my window. The deer doesn't even pause. I swear the animals around here think they own the place. I think that with a chuckle. Just to make my life more interesting, it starts to snow. In ordinary places, that's not much of a problem. In this pitch-black mountain, it could quickly become an issue. It usually doesn't snow here, but there's a call for concern when it does. Most times it's a freak occurrence and comes fast and heavy. This time is no exception. Within minutes the road is covered. Already low visibility has been reduced to nearly zero. And of course it starts when I'm furthest away from the station, right in the middle of nowhere. I slow to a crawl, knowing it will take me forever to get back, but at least I'll get there in one piece instead of sliding off a mountain to my fiery, gory death. I hope. I turn on my windshield wipers in a futile attempt to keep visibility. They work almost as well as the radio, honestly. The defroster and the wipers fight a losing battle against the onslaught of snow. I would just pull over and wait it out, but out here I don't want to end up buried in snow for days waiting for someone to come plow me out. Each station has one snow plow. I don't remember when it was used last. Suddenly I look out the front of the truck and remember that I am actually driving the only truck with the mount for the plow. Translation: I need to get back because there's no one coming to get me. As that positive thought rattles through my head, I come to a turn I see just in the nick of time. I have just enough time to wrench the wheel hard to the right and stay on the road. My tires and the deepening snow disagree on which way the truck is going, and I end up sliding toward the edge. I jump on the brakes in a panic, causing them to join the direction argument. In the end, momentum wins. I slide closer to the rail that I know won't keep me from diving hundreds of feet to my death. I'd love to say that my life flashed before me, but all I could do was see that damn snow. I'm going to die surrounded by irritatingly blinding white snow. With nothing else to do, I close my eyes and pray. Time slows as I begin to bargain with my maker. The usual stuff: I'll be better, I'll give my life to the church, I'll become a priest, a missionary, or whatever you freaking want as long as you save my life. I felt a heavy thump. This is it, I think. I'm going over the edge. As a desperate last-ditch thought, I opened my door and threw myself out into the road. I land hard, like a belly flopper on asphalt. The wind escapes my chest and refuses to come back. I lay there rocking back and forth in the cold on the white road, hoping that, by some bizarre twist of fate, someone else doesn't come along and run me over. Seconds turn to minutes as I lay there watching the snow in its relentless downpour, waiting for my breath to return. Eventually, I come around and painfully rise to my feet. The truck sits idling as if nothing has happened. I reach in and put it in park, feeling embarrassed and stupid for getting myself in such a panic. I grab my flashlight and go to the front of the truck to see the damage. I'm surprised to find the front bumper sitting 4 feet from the rail. I know I hit something, I say to myself, examining the fence and finding it undamaged. I turn the light to my bumper and find it's been bent slightly at the end. My light flashes back and forth between the entire guardrail and the damaged bumper. What the hell? As my brain wraps around this puzzle, another piece falls into place. I see patches of hair on the bumper and red in the snow. As I pursue the matter, I know the imprint of a large animal lying in the snow in front of my truck is probably not the best idea to investigate. I pull out my phone and take a picture. The impression it made was massive. This thing is at least as tall as the car is vast, even more significant. Great, I hit a bear, I say sarcastically. I sigh as I see the trail of red heading off into the trees beside the road. Guess I should go check on it. I return to my truck, grab my coat and the keys, then head after my quarry. The red is becoming difficult to track through the deepening snow. The tracks themselves seem odd. They're too close together. It's almost like as if this bear is walking on its hind legs. But why would it do that? Did it hurt its paw or something? I approach the edge of the woods, still following the red tracks. I don't want to go too far into the woods. I'm hoping I can catch a quick glimpse of the bear alive and well, looking a paw, but otherwise okay. Trekking through the dark woods in a snowstorm isn't part of the plan to keep me alive long enough to retire. As I follow the tracks further, I notice something else about them. They don't look like bear's tracks. If I would say they look like anything, I'd say more like large dog tracks. But they're way too big to be any normal dog I've ever seen. Even for a Malamute or a St. Bernard, these are massive. I step into the woods, not intending to go much further, and flash the light around a little bit. I notice the path continues going slightly uphill. Nope, I say. Not tonight. I turn and head back to the truck when I hear a low, guttural growl. I slowly turn around and see red glowing eyes staring at me from behind a tree. I shine the light in the direction and see that there are tracks that lead right up to a tree that hides all but the eyes of this creature. It's massive. The eyes must be 8 feet off the ground. I've never seen anything like this, and I still haven't seen it. Just the eyes at this point. In my terrified stupor, I do the least likely thing possible. I pull out my phone and take a picture. The flash makes it blink, but also appears to make it even more angry. It starts toward me. I would love to say that I was calm, relaxed, and collected as I returned to my vehicle and was on my merry way, but that didn't happen at all. I screamed and turned to run, but my boots were slippery and I fell, nearly hitting my head on a rock. As I gain traction and speed, I hear heavy footsteps behind me. No need to turn and look, I know it's coming after me. Oh dear God, oh dear God, oh dear God, oh dear God. I know I'm not going to make it. I do the one thing I don't want to do. I glance back. A massive mound of fur is galloping toward me, its red eyes glowing with malice. It's coming so fast that it'll overtake me at any second. No matter how fast I try to go, there's no way I'm going to get to my truck. My panicked mind runs through a myriad of options. From just give up to turn and command it to stop to throw the flashlight hoping it will fetch it and give you time to get inside the car. The moment of truth arrives. I'm almost to the truck, but I can feel its hot breath going down my neck at this point. I'll never make it around the corner. I'll try to think back to all those dinosaur movies I've seen and how they escaped. My mind reminds me that many of them ended up as a dino snack before the film was done. I sarcastically thank my brain for the happy thought and chose the one tactic that the movies always seem to show to be successful. I slid under the truck. I'm barely on the ground until I hear a loud bang. The car lurches to the side. A massive snout shoves itself far under the truck as it can, and it sniffs. I try to ease my way out from under the car, but the nose disappears and reappears on the other side. This time there are also claws pawing at me, trying to get a hold of me. I shimmy away from them only to have them show up on the other side. Back and forth we go, like a demented seesaw. Front, back, sides, wherever I go, it's right there trying to grab me. After an eternity of this game, it tries something new. The paws disappear and I feel the truck springs compress. It's climbed on top of the truck. Shoot, now can see no matter where I go. I test my theory by shining my flashlight toward the back of the truck. It instantly appears and tries to shove its snout under, snapping at me. I push further toward the front. It returns to its vanguard on top of the truck. I lay as still as possible for an eternity, trying not to move, barely breathing, hoping it will lose interest in me and return to the woods. My waiting game ends when I realize the snow is almost up to the level of the truck's frame. I'm going to lose visibility soon. I know I need to do something. I come up with a desperate and stupid plan. I shine my light at the back of the truck, causing the creature to jump down and claw at me. At the same time, I dig some snow away from the front of the car to regain visibility. Then I do the same in reverse. I shine the light at the front and dig at the back. Next, I execute the most desperate and stupid part of my plan. I threw the lit flashlight toward the front of the car and it bounces near the guardrail, and for a moment it looks like it's going to hit and bounce back. I freeze in fear as it takes one more bounce, then disappears over the side. The creature leaps down but doesn't shove its snout under the truck. It jumps the guardrail and disappears. I gasp in astonishment that my plan has worked. I lay there and marveled for a second. Then my mind kicks my ass. What the hell are you still lying here for? Get in the truck! I jump up, hitting my head on the car's underside, then roll up on the driver's side, yank on the door, and of course it's locked. I fumble with my keys just like I've seen in every horror movie ever. I wondered how those people could suddenly forget how to use a key. And now I know. After several failed attempts, I finally opened the door and threw myself inside. I started it up, slammed it into reverse, and hit the gas and nearly did a complete 360 as the tires fight for traction in the snow that has accumulated around. I take a deep breath and compose myself before giving it a little gas, just enough to get moving and get myself back on the road. This leads me to my next problem. The road is gone. All that remains is a blanket of white. Sweat forms on my brow as I start down the road, steering by measuring the distance of the trees to the bank spot that used to be a road. I crawl down the mountain this way, slowing to a near stop whenever there is a curve. Unfortunately, it's the Smoky Mountains, so it's all curves. An hour later, I'm no closer to the station. However, a minor miracle happens. The snow stops. I'm so ecstatic I'm nearly jumping in my seat. I might even make it home alive. I glanced in my rear view mirror and those hopes are dashed instantly. In the distance, I see glowing red eyes, and they are getting closer. My veins turn to ice as I press down on the accelerator. After sliding through a turn, barely remaining in control of the vehicle, I realize I can't outrun it. I slow, but only a little bit. On the few straight spots in the road, I speed up but then slow down when I get to a curve. Consecutive stretches are the only time I can afford a glance in the mirror. Each time I do, the eyes are still there and they are a bit closer. I inch closer to the station, clinging to the desperate hope that I can make it there before this thing catches and devours me. I look at my odometer and realize I'm only 5 miles from the station. It might as well be 1,000,000. I sigh as I look back and see the eyes have become considerably more significant. There's a sharp turn coming up. I know I have to slow down for it. I know that things will catch up when I do. I also know there's a steep drop-off at this turn. I'm stuck. No matter what I do, it's going to end badly. I do what has to be done. I slow down enough to keep from sliding off the edge. When I straighten out, I glance back and the eyes are gone. Could it have slipped off the edge? My hopes rise and then suddenly plummet as I see the red eyes beside me. The monster is running beside the truck. It slams into the door, making a considerable dent. It hits again and shatters the window. Its snout dives in and snaps at me. As the snarling, snapping jaws of a death inch closer, I duck and As the snarling, snapping jaws of death inch closer, I duck into the passenger seat. I do the only thing I can think of. I slam on the brakes. The unprepared monster goes flying forward as I slide to a stop. It shakes itself and stands, growling at me and baring its teeth. I jump on the gas pedal to get as much speed as possible to run it over. The truck leaps in the air as the tires pass over the massive monster. I don't slow down until I have to. After I make it through the curve, I look back and don't see the glowing eyes. I hazard a glance out the window and see nothing but snow. I can't trust the quiet. I'm so paranoid, I'm shaking, and at this point I think I'd rather see the blasted beast just to know where it was rather than this ungodly suspense. After a few minutes and many more glances back, I finally let myself relax. I'm only a mile away from the station, and I can't believe I made it. The truck explodes from impact. I feel like a bulldozer has rear-ended me. I wrestle with the steering wheel as I'm hit again. The car is moving faster even though I'm standing on the brakes. I look back and see the monster. It's pushing me. I look forward and see the guardrail crumple underneath my front bumper. The truck slides over the edge. It's not the steepest ravine in the park, but it doesn't need to be. The car falls end over end, then starts turning and rolling. It all happened so quickly I never took the time to fasten my seatbelt. I'm thrown around like a rag doll. By some miracle, I stayed inside the truck. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I woke to heavy footsteps and snarling. I'm lying sideways under what's left of the back seat. The truck is on its roof, and I'm lying in a puddle of glass and blood. The monster sticks its snout through the shattered window and leers at me with its glowing red eyes. I try to crawl away, but my leg is bent at an unnatural angle, probably broken. Pain shoots through me as I try to use my arm to push out. Ultimately, I realize there's no escape. No fight left in me. I lay there and waited for the inevitable. It sniffs at me and drool drips from its mouth as its putrid breath assaults me. This is it. I close my eyes and wait. Nothing happens. I open my eyes and it's gone. I painfully turn to see if it's playing some game, but I can't find it. "What the hell happened to you?" says one of my fellow rangers as he sticks his face into the window. "How?" is all I can manage. "Looks like you're about to be the luckiest son of a bitch I've ever seen," he says. "You must have rolled off the road up there and landed on this road down here. A few more feet and you would have been headed for another tumble." I lay there waiting for something else to happen. This is a dream, I think. I'm dreaming of being rescued while the monster chews me into pieces. "Let's get you to a hospital," the ranger says. I wake up in a hospital bed. My right arm and left arm are each in a cast. It hurts to breathe. I'm pretty sure there are some broken ribs. The door opens, and another ranger steps inside. "I see they got you all fixed up," he chuckles. "What happened to you out there? Did you fall asleep at the wheel?" I think about what I should tell him. I wonder how much he would believe, and then I remember. "Phone," I rasp. He reaches into the pocket and pulls out his phone. I shake head painfully. "No, my phone." He searches through my bag with all my clothes and pulls out my phone with several cracks on the screen. "Pictures," I rasp. He opens the screen and navigates to the pictures. He looks at the last one and says, "Well, ain't that something?" he says. I'm so glad he sees it. I can tell my story and have proof of everything I see. He turns the phone towards me. All I see in the picture is white. The flash was on. The snow wiped out the monster's image. He scrolls back to the other view of the creature's imprint, but the flash in the snow also washes it out. I'm devastated. I know what I saw and I know it's real. Isn't it? I turn away. "I'll let you go so you can rest up," he says, then walks out the door. I'm not crazy, I saw it. A month later, I'm feeling a lot better. My arm and leg and ribs are all on the mend. I filled out my accident report. I didn't mention anything about a creature. My slipping caused a crash of the snowy road, and that's how I left it. I wish I could say that I've improved mentally, that I have had less nightmares, that I don't look out the window every night and see glowing red eyes staring back at me from the woods. But I can't say that, because it would be a lie. I know it's going to hunt me down one day. I know it's waiting for me.